It puts the thrill in your inbox, and now it's making millions one email at a time. Thrillist.com. It's the guy thing that advertisers are getting. I'm Cris of Valerio, and this is Venture. Welcome to Venture, the world of small business and big ideas. We welcome thrillist.com co-founder and CEO Ben Lerer to the program.
They are Madison Avenue's most coveted eyeballs, men ages 18 to 35. That's because they're so hard to pin down. They'd rather be out driving fast cars, surfing, having a beer with the guys, or hunting down the fabled perfect burger. The boys will be boys. That's where Thrillist.com comes in. It's a daily email about what the next best guy thing is. In 2005, college buddies Adam Rich and Ben Lerer got together and started the company. Their business model was a path first paved by a woman. In 2000, Dana Levy started Daily Candy, a daily email targeted at the Sex and the City brand of urban women. Daily Candy eventually grew to reach 2.5 million subscribers in 12 cities, including London. That's when Comcast snapped it up for $125 million in 2008. Looking to strike again, the venture firm that backed Daily Candy also backed Adam and Ben. The formula worked. In just 4 years, Thrillist has grown to 1.3 million subscribers in 12 cities. And the boys, well, they expect revenues of up to $10 million this year. Their subscriber base continues to grow, and it can't be too long before the investors in this empire, built on dive bars and beer money, are ready to cash out.
So Ben, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it today. So let's get started talking just about how this kind of came about. And you actually co-founded it with a friend from school, from Penn. You guys started working together. And at what point did you decide this was what you wanted to do?
You know, we both actually had other jobs. We were about 2 years out of school living in New York, and I guess it was late 2005, and we realized that we were just being underserved by the city guides and by the men's magazines that were out there. On the local level, we were reading Zagat and City Search and sort of everything that everyone's familiar with, and ultimately we found that because they were speaking to everybody, they were speaking to nobody, and we weren't getting the information that we needed about what to do and where to go and everything along those lines. Yeah.
Okay, so now the model, it was there before. It was based off of, so tell me about Daily Candy and explain to our audience kind of what the model is and how you guys got the idea from Daily Candy.
Well, Daily Candy had been sending out emails to girls in their 20s and 30s talking about cool things to do in the city, basically a completely filtered and targeted city guide. And we figured the same thing would work for guys like us. And so we started sending out emails to our friends and family, and eventually that list sort of blossomed into a big group of people, and then advertisers started calling.
Okay, so friends and family, we have to point this out because your dad is the co-creator of Huffington Post, have a very media-rich family. How helpful was that in getting this thing off the ground?
Well, on some levels it was helpful because we had access to some really smart people who gave us good advice, but that advice was not coming from my dad. He's very sort of fatherly and instructs me to be happy and not work hard and all the stuff that a good dad would do.
Did you actually go out and try to get financing and build the business model before you started doing it, or did you try to actually do it and then get the money to fund it?
A little bit. We did it for a few months. We got the business to a few thousand subscribers. We sort of built the website using beer money that the two of us had been making.
How much? I mean, what did you do?
$10,000 or $15,000 each, which we put, I guess it's a lot of beer, but we put it into an account and said, we're going to bleed this thing dry and see what we can get to at the end. And if we have something we're proud of, we'll take it to VCs. And we had something we were proud of. And so we took it to the guys who had funded Daily Candy, actually.
What did you think the opportunities were in this space from a monetary standpoint? I mean, these are online newsletters.
I don't think we knew. I think we knew that there was a valuable demo there, but we didn't understand online advertising at all, which was why finding smart money and investors like the Pilot Group was so important, because they were able to sort of help give us a sense of what this content was worth and what this audience was worth. And from there, we've tested the market, and we've gone out to advertisers, and we've seen what they have been interested in, and we've developed, we've sort of delivered results for them and compared those to other publishers and found that we were worth the money that people are paying.
That initial funding, $250,000, is that right?
Yep.
Have you guys had second rounds of financing?
We took additional money from Pilot as sort of loans to the business over the years, totaling a few $100,000 more. and that's it. And other than that, for the last 2 years, we've been fully profitable, cash flow positive, sort of supporting ourselves.
At what point did you launch officially with the backing, with the new kind of...
October 20th, 2005. So just about 4 years ago now.
Okay, so you launched that first letter. What went into that initial launch?
It was so sad, actually. We spent, lots of nights and weekends, because we both had other jobs, creating this content, creating sort of the first week or two of content, these emails, and much of it was sort of created by us going out and scouring the city and discovering things that we weren't previously familiar with that we thought our friends would like. And the funny story was the first night we got everything ready to rock. We said, we're going live tomorrow, and then realized that we had completely forgotten about a mechanism for actually sending our emails. I mean, it was that janky an operation at that point in time.
So, okay, so talk us through that. So what do you do when you realize,
We do a little research. I mean, it's, now there's 1,000 companies doing it, but we did 15 minutes of research on the internet and found, Constant Contact or Silver Pop or one of these sort of mass email companies that allowed us to sort of plug into their engine, and we were off and running. And then, as time went on, the list grew very slowly, but it was the right kind of people, and the places or the businesses that we covered were seeing a bump in business when we wrote about them, and that's when we realized that we had something.
One of the founders of thrillist.com, telling people what's going on in their local cities, guys specifically. You're watching Venture. Stay with us. Welcome back to Venture. I'm Cris, Valerio. Today we are talking with Ben Lerer. He's one of the founders of thrillist.com, and this is the male equivalent of Daily Candy. And for people who don't know what that is, we can explain again. It's just a way for people, a newsletter essentially to the email system to kind of keep up to date with what's going on in their local city. So let's talk about the kind of the profit model here. Okay. Advertising. First off, at what point did you guys become profitable? From the time you launched to...
I think it was probably about 18 months in, maybe 2 years in, and then there was probably about a year where we were reinvesting in the business and sort of flip-flopping month to month.
So what is the main source of revenue here? It might be an obvious question. Okay, so
100%.
It's 100% advertising. Yep. How did advertisers start coming to the table here?
Well, early on, there were some brands that were very active online, sort of early to come to spending online, and the brand had a little bit of cachet and had some momentum, and they reached out to us and said, we like the kind of guys you're speaking to. We'd like to find a way to get in front of them, and we worked with them. We saw some success, and then we took those success stories and ultimately pitched them to other clients who might not have been as comfortable online and said, we've been working, it's been working for X client, and you're in that category. Why are you not working with us?
How do you guys track how people actually read their emails? Because, for instance, I get a lot of emails, you get a lot of emails, and a lot of them, but sometimes you just hit delete, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So how do you actually track who's reading it, and how do you monetize that from an advertising standpoint?
For us, we really, it's less about it's very hard to get actual data about who's reading it, because sort of the open rate is something that is not easily measured. There's so many people who are reading without downloading images. That's the default setting in a Gmail browser, or who are scanning something in a preview pane in their email browser but aren't actually opening the message. And so an open rate isn't a metric we can use. What we really use is engagement. So the number of clicks off an email, the number of purchases someone's making, third-party data. So we talk to a restaurant we write about and say, how many phone calls did you get? And that information really lets us know that we're moving the needle and that there's a lot of people reading.
So what's your click-through rate right now?
It completely depends on the topic. I mean, there'll be some pieces where the click-through rate can be 15-20%, and there'll be other ones where it's very low because we did a crappy job of covering something cool. So
what does it mean to cover something cool in a good way for you guys? I mean, what's the philosophy there, and how do you differentiate yourself from other just...
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest challenge we have. It's about finding things that are very timely. It's about finding things that we as sort of an organization and a group of guys in an office genuinely think is cool. We're not writing for sort of the kids. If we all like it, it's probably something that our readers are going to like, because it's a very specific kind of person that we're writing for.
How do you grow and yet remain somewhat exclusive, in the sense of you want people to feel like they're going to something that's interesting, new, hip, but at the same time you want to grow your subscribers because of your advertising base. So how does that dynamic work?
It's the biggest challenge that you have. How do you stay cool when you're big? And I think, again, it has to do with really developing a tight sort of relationship with the readership, so that each person who's reading doesn't feel like they're reading something that's written for 1 million people, but they feel like you actually have their interest in mind because you're writing about stuff that sort of in line with what they like.
So when you talk about advertising or pricing these advertising rates, how do you do it? Is it there's a national rate? Is it city by city? Is it, and to let our advertisers know, you guys are in 12 cities right now, 12 U.S. markets. 13. Okay.
13 and about to be 14. We're about to launch Austin.
Austin, Texas.
Yep.
So tell us, how do you price these advertisements?
We price everything based on the number of people you're reaching. And so most of the brands we work with are national. So we'll work with Pepsi, or we'll work with Starbucks, or we'll work with, AT&T on a national deal. But what we'll do is we'll drill down in those markets and we'll say, Pepsi, yes, this is national, but it's national because we're reaching people in the 14 biggest markets in the U.S. And that's ultimately a national
So you guys
footprint.
don't do the smaller brands, the brands that are actually in those cities that people would recognize from those cities?
We cover them editorially a lot, and sometimes we do deals with them, but the business model is really built on working with big national brands who want to dive deep locally in these markets, because you spend as much time going and chasing down a local shop owner as you do the CMO of a big brand at the end of the day. And so it makes more sense to sort of go after the big fish.
So what is the value to these targeted lists? I mean, you guys have email addresses of how many people at this point, and how do you premium that? How do you price that?
Well, now our subscription list is about 1.3 million.
And specifically an age demographic is what you're marketing as?
It's generally young, affluent, or sort of on the way to becoming affluent, well-educated guys living in big U.S. markets. So it's a very elusive audience.
Advertising right now, as you well know, not doing well. I mean, this is the any media company. This is the big thing. Is the model working? Is it a broken model? So what have you guys seen in the past year with all the changes that have happened in this environment and that model?
Well, for us, it's certainly working. I think when the economy took a big hit, obviously at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, a lot of brands, tightened up their wallets, but with the money they were spending said, let's do different things. Let's try to make our money go further. And online is obviously a very measurable place to spend your money, so you can see a real ROI. And particularly email is something that just traditionally it's a very personal place. Someone's inbox and the connection that you're making with them is very real and leads to real purchase intent.
So how much growth have you seen then in the past year? If you're saying a lot of people are going to this area.
For us, we're up 125%, 150% year to date.
Ben Lerer, one of the founders of thrillist.com. You're watching Venture. Stay with us. Welcome back to Venture. I'm Cris Valerio. Today we're talking to Ben Lerer. He is one of the founders of thrillist.com, and this is, explain to our audience again, just quickly for those tuning in, what thrillist.com is.
We're a super targeted city guide, essentially going and not just speaking about things that are local in whatever city we're in, but actually speaking specifically for sort of young guys.
So we were just talking about your growth, and you were saying you guys see about 120% growth rate this year. So revenues-wise, you expect revenues 5 to 10 million this year. Is that still on track?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the profit margin?
The profit margin is very healthy. In next year we'll be approaching 50%.
So what do you see and what are your growth expectations for next year?
For next year, I think we'll probably try to grow in the sort of 60 to 75% range from year over year.
One of the things that we talked about was that because people are starting to become much more targeted, trying to find creative ways to advertise, given the environment that we're in, they're looking at email as a personal and perhaps more cost-effective way of getting in. Yeah. Can that continue as we recover? I mean, as we start to see a recovery in not only and mainly in the U.S., obviously, but even global economies, do you think that model will stick?
Well, I think email is undervalued and underutilized right now. I mean, it's something that every single working human being uses, and they use all day long, and they sit in front of their computer and they're on email. And I think that all the new social tools and Facebook and Twitter and blah 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 are all very exciting and very sexy, but at the end of the day, there isn't the proven sort of. It doesn't necessarily work from an advertising standpoint, and email does, and it's been proven that it does. And I think now we're seeing sort of an email renaissance, and a lot of people coming to email and getting really a lot of email publications launching, and a lot of big companies starting to launch email publications.
Now, advertising, you guys do banners. Do you also do? Are you going to do embedded videos? Are you looking at multimedia?
We're starting to do a little bit of video, but it's really not going to be for advertising standpoint. It's just a sort of add-on to the editorial offering that we have. We, of course, do display advertising, but we really sort of our bread and butter is working as a bit of a creative team and a creative agency and working with a client and saying, okay, here's your product. We're going to look at it with sort of our editorial eye and figure out what we actually like about it, and then craft a written message speaking about why we think that's valuable for us within the demo.
And they pay you for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of included within the rate that they're paying for the advertising. But what we do is we create custom advertorial content where we actually write about the things that they want us to write about in a voice that guys are already trusting because they're reading about it, about the city.
And is that transparency there for the viewers?
Absolutely. But we find that there's no difference in sort of the response rates we get from advertising to editorial.
Okay, so one of the things I want to talk about is just kind of other revenue streams. So advertising 100% of your revenue, but you guys are you also looking at syndication of content? Publishing guides. I know that you have a lot of relationships with actual media companies. Mm-hmm. Do you see that as any kind of source of revenue at some point?
I don't know. We certainly have talked about it. At this point, though, I think that we sort of like owning the content that we're creating, and when we syndicate stuff, we give it to people because we think we'll see the value back in new subscriptions to Thrillist eventually. Some other advertising streams is we do make money off of the events that we throw, and we do that very regularly, and those ultimately serve as our advertisers because they get their products in front of consumers in sort of a face-to-face environment, and it really serves us well because we get to interact with our readers, and they get to see sort of what the brand is all about.
How much does that cost you guys from an overhead standpoint to throw those kinds of parties?
Usually very little because we're throwing them in the markets that we're in, and so we have local relationships with the venues and local relationships with music or talent or whatever it is, where people want to come out and do us a favor because maybe we covered their restaurant when it opened and they saw a great response and they want to be involved with Thrillist in some capacity, and so they'll give us very good deals.
Do you ever worry about some kind of I don't even know if you need an editorial standpoint there, but do you ever worry about that relationship and what that means for the trustworthiness of your client?
No, I don't think so. I mean, ultimately, we're going to throw an event at a place that we think is really cool, and if we covered it editorially, it also means we think it's really cool, so it all works.
13 daily, 8 weekly newsletters reaching 2.5 million subscribers, is that right?
No, 1.3.
1.3
2.5 is daily
cities.
candy.
Are you guys expanding anywhere outside of Austin?
We are. We'll be, I think, in San Diego and Denver in the next probably 6 months.
We are talking with Thrillist.com co-founder and CEO Ben Lerer. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Venture. I'm Cris and Valerio. Today we're talking to one of the co-founders of Thrillist.com, Ben Lerer, and we were just talking about just kind of advertising rates, where you guys are located. You said you're expanding into San Diego. What's the cost to launch a newsletter in a city?
It's pretty low at this point. We have most of the infrastructure built, so we have our tech team. We don't need, we need to spend a day or two sort of getting the site ready. We have a design team. We need to spend a day or two sort of getting some new assets in place. And really the biggest cost is one full-time local editor in that market who's going to be in charge of content. But all content ultimately comes back to New York and gets edited by a senior team here. And so it's one person and then some sort of incremental costs that come
How many people do you guys have right now at the company?
Somewhere between 40 and 45.
And so then do you just do the editors in those cities hire freelancers? Yeah. How do they choose how do they get that?
They work with freelancers, they work with tipsters and all that stuff, but actually more tipsters than freelancers. Usually sort of how we find content's a combination of working through those people, and content comes to us because when we write about something, a business gets affected in a positive way, and so when a restaurant opens, they know to call us, and so we're in communication with a ton of sort of burgeoning businesses and have our pick of what we want to write about.
Do you guys do you see this expanding in any way abroad into Europe and London and some of the big cities?
I think that
Are you talking with people there? In other words, would you want to acquire newsletters that are already there?
I don't think so. One of the biggest sort of mandates that we have is that anyone who signs up for Thrillist has to have gone through our sort of subscription process and has to know what they're getting themselves into and want to be on the list. That sort of goes back to the point also about how do you know people are reading. You want a consumer who wants the content, and if you go and buy lists, you just sort of, that's what spamming people is ultimately. We want to be sending people email who want the email, and so we'll start from scratch and build it up and sort of slog through the mud to get to the point where we have a real list rather than going and sort of acquiring something.
And how do you guys decide on a city?
Now we actually look at Facebook and we see how many active 21 to 35-year-olds there are using Facebook, and the more sort of Facebook users, we figure the more people who are...
You go on and look at people by that region, or do you actually request data from Facebook on those?
That's a good question. My director of marketing is the one who's sort of pulling that stuff. I figure he's speaking with the reps at Facebook, though, because we have a good relationship with them, and I think he's sort of chatting with them and figuring out what makes sense based on where the people are.
Is there a lot of cross-promotion on those types of social media sites? I mean, do you guys have partnerships with them?
We play around on Facebook a bunch, absolutely.
Like what kind of partnerships? From a monetary standpoint,
From a monetary standpoint, they have a pretty spectacularly large audience, as everyone knows, and we want to go and reach those guys, and so we'll find people who have interests that we think align with the interests of our readers, and we'll actually go and either do some advertising, or we'll partner with a third party and do some kind of a viral campaign. There's 100 different ways we can do it.
As you know, Comcast bought Daily Candy, $125 million in 2008. Do you guys have any plans to sell? I mean, you've been around since 2005. You talk about being profitable and, you know, cash flow positive. You guys have any interest? Have people approached you?
People have certainly approached us, and because we have institutional money, at some point they're going to at least want to sell their stake in the company. We're not sort of going to work every day looking at some light at the end of a tunnel and we're going to sell this thing. We're building this, we're in it, and we love it.
But you have to have some kind of horizon, too.
We do. We do. I mean, we've had money in the business for 4 years, and I think most VCs keep their money in companies for, I don't know many that leave their money in a business for more than 10 years.
So will thrillist.com still be independent next year, say?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But in 3 years?
I hope so. I mean, I love what we're doing, and as long as I'm still having as much fun, yes.
Having fun. Join us next week for more on Venture. I'm Cris Valerio. Thanks for watching.